An investigative journalist was known for uncovering the biggest stories in Las Vegas, including criminals and members of the government all doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. This caused this man to become the enemy in a lot of eyes. And so when he was found brutally stabbed to death at his home, it was unknown which enemy could have done this. However, he had just been working on a case uncovering the misconduct of an official, a politician who was running for re-election. Was this the cause of his murder? Did it date back to his decades worth of investigative journalism? And was the evidence enough to convict the killer who was found guilty? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna. I'm so grateful that you are here. We as a community on this channel focus on the victims and the survivors over the killers and the perpetrators. So if you would like to join us in that, subscribe down below. We would be happy to have you here. This is actually going to be the first in a series, if you guys are wanting it, called Silenced. And we're going to be covering cases where these victims have been completely silenced. You know, at the end of every video, I talk about speaking up because your voice is powerful enough. And these are people who have done so or who have tried to do so and in turn have been silenced. I think it's very important to especially shed light on these victims and to kind of let everyone know what they were trying to speak out about because they died in doing so. Allegedly in some cases. So let me know if this is a series that you would like me to continue. But before we dive in, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, Ana Luisa. You guys know, I just talked about them. I love them. They are a jewelry brand that takes over my collection. You guys know their pieces are my go-tos. I'm wearing 3 of them on my little earring stack here, and they are tarnish-free jewelry with a 2-year warranty. But the holiday sale is actually here, and it's 25% site-wide, and if your cart hits $250, they will send you a free pair of diamond studs. So with many different women in your life, and even some men, they will adore these quality pieces of jewelry, and it's the perfect Christmas gift. Honestly, I need to start shopping for my family and get them a few of my favorite pieces. So start shopping now. Click that link below for 25% off. Now let's get back to the story. Silence. So it was 2022 in Las Vegas, and Jeff German was a 69-year-old investigative journalist who had been writing for the past 40 years. He was currently working at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and he had worked at the Las Vegas Sun. He was known not to be afraid to write the truth. He had covered organized crime, government, politics, and court cases. He, in fact, covered the MGM Grand Fire that happened in 1980, which killed 85 people due to smoke inhalation. He uncovered that this fire was actually caused by an electrical ground fault, but the hotel lacked the sprinkler system that they needed. The county's fire chief had even talked about these risks from them not having it, but there had not been any safety regulations for hotels until that year that the fire happened. So they were working on updating everything, and they were only 20% done with the needed corrections at the time of the fire. So he exposed this. This MGM hotel ended up paying up $260 million in lawsuits, but that wasn't all that Jeff covered. Jeff also covered the 2000s investigation deemed Operation G Sting by the FBI into bribes taken by Clark County, Nevada commissioners and city council members, as well as San Diego, California council members. These bribes were actually from strip club owners who wanted to in turn have them remove the no-touch laws from the club so that their women that they were employing were able to be touched and essentially make them more money. This was one of the biggest political scandals in the history of Nevada. By 2001, while still working at the Las Vegas Sun, Jeff wrote Murder in Sin City, a true crime book about the death of Ted Bunyan. He also had a podcast series called Mobbed Up: The Fight for Las Vegas. Now, in 2010, he joined the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and by 2017, during the mass shooting that occurred at the festival, Jeff reported that the shooter had actually initially fired at jet fuel tanks at the airport before he turned on the concert members. Now, he was actually said to be the first to uncover this, exposing these wrongdoings, exposing the information that others were not covering. Jeff German's whole life was uncovering the real story, the truth. He was not afraid to speak up. He wasn't said to be a physically strong man or even a physically big man, but he was very brave. He was said not to be threatened by the characters that he was writing these stories about. He once had his tires slashed for talking about members of a mob, but this didn't stop him. His whole job was to inform the public of what was really going on behind the scenes in Las Vegas. He was known to be born to be a reporter. Another story that Jeff had covered and had made a very big impact in was the death of Susan Winters, which was an alleged suicide back in 2015. Now, her family believed that this was not, in fact, a suicide, that she had been killed. So as Jeff began to dig deeper, he found that Susan had actually ingested a lethal combination of painkillers and antifreeze. Jeff began to write articles that her husband was Jeff's prime suspect. Her husband, Brent Dennis, was ultimately charged with murder, and he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. Jeff German helped Susan's family get justice for her. So by March of 2022, he was well known to be speaking out in regards to anything that needed to be covered. And that's when he was contacted by a woman about a possible story. He was more than ready to dive deep, and no one would know that this was potentially his last story that might get him killed. 6 months into this investigation, on September 3rd of 2022, Jeff was found deceased. He was outside of his home on Bronze Circle in the West Valley of Las Vegas. A 911 call had come in that morning from a worried neighbor who had gone over to check on Jeff and found him lying dead next to his home. He was covered in blood, and the police arrived at 10:30 in the morning to find Jeff with multiple stab wounds. He was dead upon arrival, and police believe that he had been killed in an altercation with another person where he was stabbed multiple times. His death was ruled a homicide due to multiple sharp force injuries. He had been stabbed 7 times. He had a deep laceration to his throat that cut his artery. 3 more wounds were found, 1 near his heart, and it was believed that his time of death was actually the day prior. And this all seemed very personal to investigators. But there were many people who were said to have it out for this investigative reporter who had an innate sense of right and wrong. Now, the Las Vegas Review-Journal that he worked for would identify him and stated that he was often investigating big stories in Nevada, but they had not heard any direct threats against him recently. So the Las Vegas police stated that it was a bloody crime scene with blood on the bushes. The bushes were actually broken, but there was no sign of a break-in into his home. Now, the neighbors had come over and shut the garage door about a day prior, noticing that it was open and had never been shut. They also could not get in contact with Jeff to let him know. But there was no sign of a break-in in this home. He had his phone, his keys, and his wallet on him, and there was cash inside. So robbery was quickly ruled out. So investigators honed in on the investigative reporting that placed him basically in the middle of this crime and corruption. A fellow journalist claimed that Jeff had run down some of the most dangerous characters on the planet. But during a search of Jeff's home, a taco restaurant receipt was located that was dated the day prior when he was believed to have been murdered. This was at 9:03 in the morning. So when the police arrived at the shop, they watched footage of Jeff walking in by himself to eat. He was in the same clothes that he was found murdered in, and he was alone the entire time, and he left alone. This was around the time that one of Jeff's neighbors, the Baileys, would actually contact the police, and they had evidence, which was in the form of footage from their own surveillance cameras. They had actually caught the murder on camera. They had a camera that pointed at Jeff's home where the body was found directly to the side of his house. And on September 2nd, around 11:18 a.m., a man was seen walking to his home. Now, this man walked to the side of the home where he had kind of this like gated entrance to the backyard, and he entered the gate. However, this footage was grainy. It was far away. They were unable to see his face. He was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, and he also had on a bright orange shirt, a vest, Nike sneakers, and was carrying a big gray bag. Nothing occurred for the next 5 minutes in the footage until the garage door actually opened. Jeff was seen walking out, and then he headed around the side through the gate to his backyard. The attack was seen briefly from afar. It was quick. It appeared vicious. The hat-wearing person attacked Jeff, and then Jeff fell to the ground and never got back up. That's when the man with the hat calmly walked out of the gate in the same direction that he had come from, and he left. He was gone, but that was not the last time that they would see him on the footage, because 30 minutes later, a red SUV Yukon Denali pulled up, and the same person with the hat got out, went back to the crime scene, and then drove off again. Unfortunately, the license plate on this car was unreadable in the footage. Now, while investigators could not track down this exact vehicle, they were able to get DNA from the crime scene from under Jeff's fingernails. He had very obvious defense wounds. He had fought off his attacker, and so this DNA was sent in to CODIS for a match. However, there was no match in the current system. This was frustrating, as investigators did believe that there was a prime suspect who had been burglarizing homes around this time. This was a man named Bob the Burglar who was committing robberies in the summer of 2022, and they believed he could be responsible. Bob the Burglar, he was often seen wearing a hat like the man in the footage, so they were trying to connect him. However, Bob the Burglar's DNA was in the system, and it hadn't been a match. So 3 days later, on September 6th, police released the video of this man in the hat to bring in tips to identify this killer. They also included the SUV to be identified as well. It was believed to be a 2007 to 2014 red or maroon GMC Yukon Denali with chrome handles, a sunroof, and a luggage rack. By the next day, an arrest was made after a tip emerged. Now, a Clark County public administrator named Robert Tellis was arrested on suspicion of murder. His home was also being searched. He was an elected official from a family of politicians, and he managed unclaimed estates. He was a married man with 3 children, and he had become a lawyer who opened his own law office focused on estate planning and probate. He ran for public administrator in 2018 and won, taking office in 2019. But he had been the subject of Jeff Gearman's most recent investigation. You see, the woman that I told you came forward to Jeff in March of 2022, she was Alicia Goodwin, and she was an estate coordinator for Clark County Public Administrator's office, and she was the employee of Robert Tellis. She came to Jeff because she was desperate. Alicia spoke about her job, her boss, and the problems that they were all experiencing. Her 3 coworkers, who were all also women, spoke out to Jeff, saying basically the same story. They were all terrified, they were living in survival mode, and they did not want to go to work. They all spoke about their boss, Robert Telles, the public administrator who had taken office in January 2019, 3 years prior. The women would tell Jeff that it was a toxic environment from the very beginning. They were ordered not to speak to each other in the office, and one woman named Rita, who had actually been in this office for the past 12 years, was actually told by Robert that everyone was now going to report to him. She was his second in command, and she said when he first got into office, he came into her office, slammed his palms down on the table, and said, "We're ripping off the Band-Aid. You're no longer supervising anyone. No one reports to you. They all report to me."
We had episodes of what I would call pure rage, and it would be the smallest little thing that would set him off. There were signs that he might do something harmful. Couldn't somebody just let this person know this is not proper behavior, it's not professional, it's not appropriate?
Alicia stated that Robert had seen her talking to two women in the office one day, called them all into his office, and he told them to sit down and shut up. He then said that they were not going to talk, he was going to talk. The women also stated that they believed and had proof that Robert was in an inappropriate relationship with another woman in the office named Roberta. They said that shortly after this, Roberta was using this relationship to assume power within the office and make more decisions than she actually had the power to make. So the women had followed this alleged couple, who would meet in the parking garage of a nearby mall. They would park next to each other and would end up in the back seat of Roberta's car. The women took videos and pictures, and they would then get out and go their separate ways. But with this footage, Jeff knew he had a story. And while preparing to write this, he actually reached out to both Roberta and Robert Telles. He told Robert that he wanted to get his side of the story. And Robert actually agreed at this point to have an interview, and he brought Jeff into the office. He denied everything while talking to the camera. He said he was trying his best to make everyone happy in the office, and that basically there were a lot of people who had been from the prior administration that did not agree with what he was doing, but the new people that he had hired did side with him, and they were happy. He basically called them the old timers that were unhappy. Now, both Robert and Roberta denied the affair. They were both married at that time, and Robert stated that they were just trying to destroy his life and his marriage, and that he was infinitely in love with his wife, and that he had just met up with Roberta to get things off of his chest in regards to work with somebody who understood, and that he's now being framed as a cheater. But journalist Jeff would go on to publish his first article on Robert Telles on May 16th of 2022. This was called "County Office in Turmoil with Secret Video and Claims of Bullying Hostility." Jeff claimed that he interviewed half a dozen employees, some who had left the office and some who were still there, who spoke of a hostile work environment. He found that Roberta had been given a lot of duties as an office supervisor, which were beyond her parameters that she was supposed to have, and that she had a favored status with Robert. Robert was said to move his cubicle next to Roberta's, and they began talking, they began having lunch, and having numerous closed-door meetings where they were giggling, and all the other employees said that they were never allowed inside of his office. Robert had claimed that the employees were just unhappy with the way that the office was taken out of their control, but the new employees were still super happy. Yet many of the employees were claiming that they had suffered emotional stress. They were always on guard, always under stress, and one of them actually was contemplating taking her life. They said that Robert had a temper, he assigned unnecessary work, he set unrealistic performance goals, he wouldn't respond to any questions, and he was always trying to dig up dirt on them and turn them against each other. That anyone who questioned his authority was chastised. One anonymous employee said she actually ate her lunch in a bag lunch in her car because she didn't want to be seen socializing with the employees that Robert didn't like, because she knew she would get in trouble for that. She said that they were all constantly worried that they would be reprimanded or verbally abused. And another former employee stated that she quit due to the stress at work, and that Robert was constantly accusing them of doing everything without any investigation into what they were doing. Now, a part-time investigator, Janelle Lee, stated that the office environment was one like she had never seen with Robert Tellis. Robert was working to create division in the office, that they were all walking on eggshells. However, Roberta stated that the staffers were responsible for creating all the drama, that it did not have anything to do with Robert, the man she was allegedly having an affair with. But in the 19-page complaint filed with Clark County office by these women, Alicia alleged that there was discrimination against her due to the fact that she was Mormon, and that Robert had retaliated against her when she first filed this in 2020. Now, Jeff wrote in this article that because Robert was an elected official, the county had no authority to discipline him. They could only monitor how the employees were being treated. And after this was published, there was actually a consultant sent to the public administrator's office to supervise what was happening. And Robert was very upset with this. He contacted Jeff to say that he wrote that article to make Robert sound like he was the guilty one and that it wasn't fair or balanced. Robert then released a statement saying, "Addressing the false claims against me. You may believe that I betrayed your trust. You may believe that I'm not the man that I have portrayed myself to be. Some of you may not know all the good work I have done for Las Vegas. I hope by the end of this page you will see what I know to be true. The article was false. The article was intentionally gut-wrenching. It was so ugly that you almost had to believe it was true. I can understand why you might have, with the writer's skill at pushing buttons. Also, the timing of the article was very convenient for my opponent, Rita Reed. My hope now is to present the facts to you so that you may reconsider your opinion if you believe the article to be true." Now, the Rita Reed that he spoke of was actually an employee of his who was going to run against him for re-election. She was one of the women who had come forward with Alicia to Jeff to get this story covered. But 10 days later, on March 26th, Jeff Gehrman wrote his second article regarding this alleged misconduct. He spoke about how Clark County hired a former coroner to resolve turmoil within the office. And then Robert made a statement that he was pleased to have this person on his team, saying, "His assistance will allow me to focus on serving the community and continuing our success. The false accusations of individuals who put self-interest over service are a distraction, and I will not let that deter the fulfillment of my commitment to the community." But in this article, Jeff also wrote about a very public fight on Facebook between Robert and the former public admin, and they were blaming each other for the disruptive office behavior. The former admin was saying it was embarrassing that Robert had done all of this and had been with Roberta, and asked him what he was thinking. He said it was manipulation that backfired. It was improper, inexcusable, inappropriate behavior that created a liability for the county and for him personally and professionally. But the so-called whistleblower of this entire misconduct case, Alicia Goodwin, who had first come to Jeff, stated that after these articles were coming out, she was feeling unsafe at the office. She still worked there, and she'd been interviewed by officials from 2 different units of the county HR department on 3 different occasions, and said that another employee actually went on a tirade near her office, cursing and slamming drawers and making comments that she felt were directed at her, and they were very angry. Alicia believed that Robert was retaliating against her and was not giving her the proper direction to handle her changing duties when she was trying to leave. She believed that she was being set up for failure. So Jeff contacted Robert once again at this time to let him know that they were doing another story on him and that the employees believed that he was threatening them. Basically, Jeff wanted Robert's comments on this. But Robert wrote back, "It's fine. At this point, they've won. Do what you would like." So Jeff's third article was published on June 18th, where Jeff spoke about how Robert Tellis and his re-election was in jeopardy. Robert had actually written several angry letters online, as well as threatening tweets to the reporter Jeff Gehrman. These were in June of 2022. One reading, "Looking forward to lying smear piece number 4 by," and then he tagged Jeff, #1trickpony. "I think he's mad that I haven't crawled into a hole and died." In another tweet, he wrote, "Wife hears rustling in the trash. Her, honey, is there a wild animal in the trash? Me, no dear, look, it's..." And then he tagged Jeff again, going through our trash for his 4th story on me. Oh, Jeff. Robert also called Jeff a typical bully on Twitter, or X. But Jeff's 4th article was published 4 days later on June 22nd, and Robert had actually conceded the race, writing, "At this point, I do believe I will lose this race, and I'm looking forward to going back to the practice of probate law, where I can continue to help families." He had lost to his second in demand, Rita Reed, one of the women who had first spoke out against him. Rita claimed that Robert remained combative, that they still had 6 months in office with him, and that instead of trying to heal the office, he was just pulling them apart further.
Somebody in HR said, well, maybe somebody should run for office. And that was really disheartening. We were hoping to make it better without that kind of a huge leap.
By July 1st, Robert Tellis posted an update to his campaign website referring to this fabricated scandal. He appeared to blame Jeff Gearman for exposing this misconduct, bullying, and affair with a subordinate while he was in office, resulting in the loss of his re-election. But Jeff was working on article number 5 about Robert Tellis and had requested emails and texts between Robert and Roberta on July 13th of 2022. Robert was actually told about this request because he then asked to review anything being sent. Robert and Roberta were then informed on September 1st of what was being sent off to Jeff. And 15 hours later, Jeff was murdered. The day that Robert was arrested, he had actually given his DNA at a traffic infraction earlier in the day. Officers then observed a cut on his finger during that time, and they also had learned that his wife drove a red Denali SUV. Later that day, they arrived at his home to arrest him. However, he had barricaded himself in the bathroom. He began to cut his arms, but he ended up being arrested and taken to the hospital for those self-inflicted injuries. Inside of his home, a gray shoulder bag, as well as the Nike sneakers that appeared to match the man in the footage, was found. One of those shoes had actually been cut into pieces and put into a Ziploc baggie, and pieces of the cut-up straw hat were found inside a bag as well. However, the orange shirt and the murder weapon were not located. Robert Tellis's DNA was then tested against the DNA under Jeff Gearman's fingernails, and it was a match. His office was then searched, and on his computer it was found that Robert was searching for the make and model of Jeff's car as well as photos of his home. 6 weeks later, Robert Tellis was indicted by a grand jury for murder with the use of a deadly weapon, and he pleaded not guilty. He claimed he was being framed. While interviewed for 48 hours, Robert stated that the so-called evidence was planted and he would prove that at trial.
You believe there was police misconduct?
Through and through. And again, the pleading that we're going to file tomorrow will show through and through that illegal records were obtained. A device was illegally used to monitor my cell phone. Even though I don't have all the evidence from the subpoenas yet, at the end of the day, once all the evidence comes out, you'll see every single one of those issues. It'll be clear as day.
Prosecutors were looking into the police investigation, and they found that the Denali was seen leaving Robert's home that day and moving closer to Jeff's, and then the man wearing the hat was walking through the neighborhood before going to Jeff's home. With this evidence and the evidence of Jeff's article exposing Robert Tellis, they honed in on him as their prime suspect. They found 100 images of Jeff's home on Robert's phone, and it was believed he engaged in surveillance of the victim. But the opening statements by the defense stated that the police had framed Robert Tellis, that there were 67 other red Denalis, but police did not investigate the other vehicles, only Robert's wife. There was no blood found on any of the evidence inside of Robert's home, which they found was strange, and the defense attorney then spoke about the strange behavior from a Las Vegas detective who inserted himself in the murder case, and that Jeff had many other people who would threaten him about his writing. The defense stated that Robert was trying to uncover corruption in his office, and he became a target of a police detective that was working on that, and Robert was innocent. But then Roberta testified. This was Roberta Lee Kennett, the alleged mistress of Robert Tellis and an employee of the public admin's office. She said that when Robert came into the office, he made a lot of changes. She stated that she had become friends with him and that they were embarrassed when the articles were coming out. She said that Robert said he hated Jeff. Roberta said she was actually moved to social services from her role at the public admin's office, and she actually went into the office to finish up some of her duties there on September 2nd, the alleged day of the murder. Roberta and Robert had spoken that day about the email that they had both gotten that Jeff was basically trying to obtain their emails to each other. She said the next time she spoke to Robert was the next morning when she saw that Jeff was dead. She sent him a screenshot of the article that said that, and he responded, "Holy shit." Then 4 days later, she texted him, "Rob, WTF, please do not be driving your Yukon around for a while." She said this is because she'd heard that the Yukon was associated with murder, and he responded with, "That's crazy." She later said, "Please tell me your Yukon is not that color," and he said, "It is similar, if not the same." She then begins to ask about the racks on his car, if he had them too, and she tells him that she's freaking out. He tells her that he didn't do it, but Roberta said at this time she was starting to suspect him. This is when Derek Appy, a Las Vegas detective, testified that prior to the murder, Robert had actually been speaking with him about corruption taking place in the probate courts. Robert had met with the detective in March, which was the same time that Robert's employees were going to Jeff with their story. But Robert had been telling this detective that he was doing his own investigation of a company called Compass Realty, a private real estate company who were allegedly not notifying the next of kin for these estates. They were just filing these false documents to the courts and selling those residents to employees of the company, or at least that's what Robert alleged. So Detective Appy stated that he was working with Robert on all of these cases and the possible corruption, but that after the articles started coming out about Robert came to him saying he was getting threatening texts, and he asked the detective to investigate that as well. The detective did, but did not find that they were threatening enough to actually be able to press charges. So by August, Detective Appy was still investigating Compass Realty when Robert lost the election. And that is when his employees, Rita and Alicia, the ones who originally had gone to Jeff, had a meeting with this detective about the allegations against Robert. So this is where the claims from the defense came from, that Robert was not a bad guy. In fact, he was looking into corruption during that time. But a Planet Fitness manager then testified that Robert came to the Las Vegas gym the day of the murder using his membership at 12:09 p.m. on September 2nd, when Jeff was believed to be murdered around 11 a.m. However, the CCTV was no longer available for the gym. Robert's cell phone showed no outgoing activity from 8:48 that morning to 2:05 p.m. that day, and he claimed he had not left his house, but police believed he just left his phone at home. Now, Robert himself then testified, and this was 2.5 hours of a stream of consciousness testimony. He was basically allowed to testify by narrative rather than question and answer. He began by saying that he was nervous. He had waited for this day for 2 years, that it was all a nightmare, that he was innocent. He spent quite some time talking about Compass Realty and the allegations against them and their corruption that he had found, and he admitted that the reports of the affair with Roberta were actually true. So basically the defense and Robert were trying to focus on the fact that he was working with this detective Appy, who could have planted evidence against him in regards to the murder. But he said with the murder, he could have been framed by the police or by the political and social old guard real estate network resisting his efforts to fight corruption in the probate courts. He said that he was home all morning on September 2nd until he went to the gym at noon. When
Mr. Gurman's article, his first article, comes out. I think we had those text messages from me from the day that I saw the article where I was upset. And I think, anybody who's the subject of an article that says certain things about you, could reasonably feel upset about it, right? I knew I didn't do this thing And yet the police claim to have this evidence. Did what they did to me. And I have a $1 million life insurance policy. I didn't want my family to have to go through more torture. And so I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought, you know what, if I can avoid the pain that they're going to suffer during this whole circus and put some money into their hands to make up for me not being there, then maybe this is the thing to do. But it was, I mean, never, I'm not guilty. I didn't kill Mr. German. But as you can see, I attempted suicide.
He then took off his shoe to show that he always wore lifts to make him taller, and that he never wore branded shoes because lifts didn't fit in there. He was allegedly pointing out the fact that the killer was wearing brand Nike shoes in the video, which were the same found at his home, but he didn't wear Nike.
You had told this jury that you felt like it looked like someone who knew what they were doing. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You believe this was a professional hit?
And that's what I believe.
Okay. And you believe this killer is kind of almost like someone hired to do this job, like an assassin, essentially, right?
That is what I believe, yes, sir. Well, I think the killer got a car like mine.
The prosecution then asked him to read a text message from his own wife the day of the murder. This wasn't found on her phone, but her Apple Watch, and this read, "Where are you?" Robert stated he ignored texts, emails, and voice messages that day when he was at home, and then he went to the gym. He was asked why his DNA was found under Jeff's fingernails, and he could not explain. He said he didn't know why people conspired to frame him, and they were able to put key pieces of evidence inside of his home.
There's one thing I didn't hear you mention, the DNA. I'd like to talk about that with you. You're not disputing that your DNA is underneath Mr. Gehrman's fingernails, are you?
Yes, I am.
Okay. But you've heard the testimony. It's there, correct?
I don't know if it was there or at what point it might have gotten there, sir.
Okay. I'm not asking you how it got there. Are you really denying that your DNA is underneath the fingernails?
Without knowing the truth, yes, I am.
Okay. Well, you've heard witnesses testify.
Right.
So the DNA lab's in on it too?
I don't know. I don't know at what point. I don't know what point this sample was collected.
Sir, please tell this jury, how in the world does your DNA get underneath Mr. Gehrman's fingernails?
I don't know because I did not kill Mr.
So
German.
you have no idea how it could have gotten underneath your fingernails, correct?
Under my fingernails?
I'm sorry, under his fingernails, correct?
I don't know that it ever was, sir.
You think Metro's framing you for this?
As I said before, I think that we've got some officers who are overzealous and who've decided to help Jappy plug holes in his case.
Sure.
Not knowing what his relationship was with Compass Realty.
The prosecution stated Jeff's writing destroyed Robert's career. It destroyed his reputation. It probably threatened his marriage and exposed things that even he admitted he did not want the public to know. He did it because Jeff wasn't done writing. The jurors had deliberated for 3 days with 400 pieces of evidence. On August 28th of 2024, Robert Tellis was found guilty and sentenced to life with parole after 20 years.
He really thought he could prove his innocence. He really wanted to tell his story. He thought he told it well enough that we really did look over everything from point A to point B, and we wanted to get him his best shot.
The judge sentenced him to an additional 8 to 20 years for using a knife and for the victim being over 60. The women who had originally come to the victim, Jeff Gehrman, for help to share their story against Robert Tellis would tell 48 Hours that if they could tell Jeff one thing, it would be, "I'm sorry." What do you believe? Was there enough evidence to convict Robert Tellis for the murder of the investigative journalist who was exposing him in the media? I think the DNA under his fingernails is pretty damning. If we did not have that, maybe, there would be more looking into, could this evidence really have been planted in his home? Why was there no blood on the evidence found? But with defensive wounds and DNA, how terrifying that a man who just wanted to expose the evil of this world was taken for that very reason. I think he probably knew that was a risk all along and was willing to risk that. But that does not mean that he deserved to be taken out in such a brutal way. Unfortunately, I think this is probably something that happens quite often that we are just not privy to, with people who are trying to speak out being silenced. So this is the first installment of our series about Jeff German and his fight to expose the truth. So thank you so much for listening to this story. Remember to check out Ana Luisa with my link down below. And don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.